welcome to our June workshop. I'm Priya and I'm an education consultant here at Teach2030. We are delighted to have you here on our final workshop of our series, specifically focusing on differentiation and inclusion. Now, what we'd love to let you know is that we have some exciting news about our workshops as well. So please do join us to share a little bit more about our workshops at the end. So stay tuned right until the end of this particular workshop too. Now, whilst you're waiting, we would love to know a little bit more about you and where you're joining from our global community. So if you can, in the comment box below or live on Facebook if you're joining as well, let us know where you're from and your name, and also a little bit about your role as well. We would love to know a little bit more about you too. I'm just going to pop up the chat box just in case as well. Brilliant. So whilst you're doing that, what are we focusing on our final workshop? Focusing on differentiation and inclusion. So we're looking at how to make resources stretch further. We know focusing on this is a particular area of struggle for many of our educators. So we're going to be focusing on this particular area, how to make resources stretch further and how to navigate that within your classroom too when it comes to your planning as well. So without further ado, let's have a look at how we can look at this, focusing on 3 learning objectives. So to answer our title on our June workshop, here are 3 objectives that we're looking at. We're going to be identifying the challenges with resources in the classroom. We're going to be focusing on the importance of planning and thinking in advance, and specifically giving you one strategy. This one strategy we're going to be focusing on is going to be looking at group work too. Now, for many of you who've already joined us, you'll be aware that our workshops are always co-hosted by our ambassadors too. And we are thrilled today to have Emmanuel from Nigeria, our Teach2030 ambassador, join us and share his perspectives within his classrooms, how he navigates this particular issue as well. Thank you so much. We do have somebody joining today from a teacher from Nigeria as well. So thank you so much for joining. So let me introduce to you Emmanuel as well. You can unmute. Can you hear me, Emmanuel?
Oh, yeah, Priya, I can hear you, Priya. Good day, Priya. How are you today?
Very good, thank you. Thank you so much for joining and all of your time and support as well. Would you like to just tell everyone who's joining today a little bit about yourself too?
Okay, thank you, Priya. So happy to do that. I'm Emmanuel Anya. I'm from Nigeria, West Africa. I'm a high school history teacher and I've been teaching for 5 years now. And my passion is always to inspire students to improve on their learning outcome. Thank you so much, Priya.
Thank you so much for letting us sharing your experiences as well. Really do appreciate it as well. Now, for many of you who are just joining now the workshop, it's wonderful to have you here. Thank you so much. So let us know in the comments box where you're joining in from as well. It'd be really lovely to see where our global community is joining in from as well. So we're going to start, which is a really good point now, is to answer our first objective today. So I'm just going to check on Facebook too, if anyone has joined as well. I can't quite see anybody at the moment. Oh, I can see one person. And again, you can also comment in the box as well if there's anything that you would like to join us live on Facebook too. So thank you so much, Kalichi. Lovely to have you here to join us as well. So let's have a look at our first learning objective. Now I'm going to launch a question to you shortly. And the question is this, and it's going to be particularly, one moment, it's going to be particularly on just Zoom, but if you're joining on Facebook too, I can also share the question as well. It says, what is the biggest challenge you face with resources in your classroom? What is the biggest challenge that you face in resources in your classroom. Now, to help you with this, I'm going to launch a question. And you will see that on your screens now. Am I right, Emmanuel? Can you see that on your screens now?
Oh, yeah, sure. We can see very clear.
So you have some time to answer this particular question. The question is, what challenge do you face with resources in your classroom? So if you're joining on Facebook, it says the following: limited resources, number 1. Number 2 is limited time to deliver subject content. Or number 3, is it lack of appropriate materials in textbook? If you are joining in live on Facebook, you can just write down the number. I'll repeat them in a moment. Limited resources, number 1. Number 2, limited time to deliver subject content. Or 3, lack of appropriate materials in textbook. You can also write down an other as well, which is also, if you've got any other particular challenges, please do feel free to join as well. So we've got some feedback already. So continue just to see the poll on your screen, and you can just add your comment on there too. If you're joining on Facebook, you can also add something on there too. So I'm just going to end the poll, and I think we've got most people who have already wanted to join. So here is the results. So as you can see, limited time to deliver subject content is something that is particularly a real issue as well. And it seems like limited resources as well. Now, these are all challenges that a lot of teachers do face, and we've also been discussing with a lot of educators too. Now, whilst we can't look at all of these, unfortunately, we're going to take a bit of a deep dive on one of them in particular. And so with the help of Emmanuel, in the context of his classroom particularly, he's going to share a particular challenge that he faces and how we can try and alleviate some of those issues as well. So here's a quick scenario. Emmanuel, would you like to just share a little bit about this as well?
Oh, yes. Thank you, Priya. Yeah, actually, we have this issue, not just myself, but basically for most teachers in sub-Saharan Africa, we have this challenge, and particularly for me as a classroom teacher, the challenge here is limited resource. So how or what helps me to overcome this challenge? I try to come up with what I call the group work, which is kind of a project-based learning. So that is one way in recent times I've been able to mitigate the challenge of research in my classroom. It's so interesting the way I go about it, actually. What I do is to kind of utilize or maximize my classroom space. So that is one idea I would love to share with you today, and for the teachers we have connected with us. It's really worked for me, and I think irrespective of your subject area, you can actually try this, and it worked. It worked for me, and I could see the impact. There was evidence for learning. Okay, on my students. Yeah.
Thank you. And I think this is probably typical of what your classroom, you suggested here, of many of our learners as well, where, you know, there are lots of students in a classroom and we don't have enough to distribute those resources evenly as well. So how can we do that as well? And you talked very briefly, you just talked about like group work. So let's introduce one of those tasks as well, in particular, utilizing classroom space. So we're looking particularly at group work. I'm sure many educators use group work, and this is about learning experiences which students can learn from each other, which is always really incredible. Self-regulated learners here. But how can we share this in the classroom? So here's an example here. Group work, project-based learning, which is what Emmanuel had shared with us, utilizing classroom space. So this is a typical classroom, and in this classroom space, there are 4 different stations or 4 different activities. So Emmanuel, you've done this in your classroom. Would you like to share a little bit more about this classroom and how you've used group works to help stretch all of those resources so that all learners can meet their needs for their learning as well.
Thank you, Priya. Yeah, I've actually, like I said in my introduction, I've actually tried this out and it worked for me. So what happens is like, this is a typical classroom where you have the four corners of the classroom and we want to see how we can utilize them effectively to stretch learning. Okay, so what we do here, or what I do rather, is to have different resources in these different four stations. That's the first four corners of the classroom. So I get my students grouped maybe in fours, depending on the size of your class, or in five. And then what I do, since I have a limited resources, so what I do is to provide them, like for instance, if I'm taking a lesson as a history teacher, I want to teach them the evolution of mankind. For instance, if we're taking the lesson evolution for mankind for today. So what I do is basically, because the challenge is limited resources, so I'm going to get some kind of human, a kind of, okay, let me talk about a map, okay, a geographical map, historical map as one of my resource materials. So if I have a geographical map, I can also go ahead to talk about timeline. Okay, I provide them with a historical timeline. But when we talk about history, this may not be peculiar with all of us, but for me as a history teacher, these are some of the instructional materials I can engage my students with. So when I provide them with a map, maybe talk about map of Africa, because I want to look at human civilization from the African perspective. And then I provide them historical timelines. And then again, I provide historical artifacts. So what I do basically is to spread these resources around these stations. So what the students got to do is to take turns, okay, assessing this material. So for activity one, I may provide them with a map of Africa so they could see where we're talking about. If we are talking about Egypt, for instance, so they can see what they're learning. And when they're through, station 2 can have that and then move the historical timeline they have. And so this is how we try to rotate this research to see that students are engaged. Now, it's not just about rotating these resources. You also instruct them, what are they expected to do? So for those in station 1, I want to tell them, because it's all about, kind of carrying your students along. We have the higher and the lower ability students. So I may have them in the first station. And then for those of them in station 1, I can tell them, okay, you identify where we're talking about, the geographical location of Egypt in the map. Then for location 2, I want to interrogate them to find out what time in question are we talking about as we look at our human civilization. So I may want them to find out, is it in the 11th or 12th century we're talking about? And then for group 3, I also want to find out from them, to give them the instruction to kind of identify the historical artifacts in place. So this way, it helps me to stretch my resource further. And it helps them to also maximize the use of the limited resources I have. Okay, so then we have the group 4, where we now have, I can provide them with a reading activity, okay, because in history, we're very critical about source. So whatever material we're engaging, want to know who is the author or the reference and all that. So we can have that in group 4. So you will agree with me. While these resources are being rotated, our students take turn to having them. Number 1, from the first group, they have the opportunity to identify the location. So they have something they could see. And then when it gets to station 2, they could have, okay, to identify also the historical timeline. And then, so this is how I take them, because the time is short. Because for us in Africa here or in Nigeria, I may have like 35 minutes for a period. So how do I maximize this limited resource? So utilizing the classroom space actually helped me to do so.
That's a really good point. And I like the way that you've also built that into the context of a lesson as well, in a specific lesson. So thank you so much. And there are some points to consider, such as time limitations and using clear instructions at each station so pupils are aware of what to do as well. But utilising classroom space has been really helpful. Now, as we're coming towards the end of our workshop and our June workshop as well, I hope you have found that this particular strategy has been really useful as well. And so here is our last poll that we would like to share with you. And it's particularly just asking you a brief question. And this is the question, if I can just launch it. Oh, I'm not sure what's going on here. I don't know if if another poll has already been, I'll try again if not. I have a feeling there might be an issue there. So I might just leave that poll for a moment now as well. But if you are going to try something like this, let us know in the comments, or if you have already tried utilising classroom space, let us know in the comments, either on Facebook or on Zoom as well, if you've used something like this before, this particular strategy too. So to consolidate a little bit more about what we've shared today is create a culture of classroom participation amongst your learners as well. And if you've created or using this in an activity, such as group work, think about the resources that your activities might need or might require for that particular lesson. Consider how will all students remain engaged through that activity as well. So maybe having some clear instructions and using group work to help stretch your resources in your classroom is always really valuable too. Now, we have a code here, which is EA Nigeria, which is Emmanuel's code. So you can also get some more information about group work, as well as lots of other strategies as well through our Teach2030 courses. And so you can gain part 2 for free if you want to visit, and I'm sure that many of you have visited already. It is teach2030.com. You can log in, you can register and follow all the steps, and use this code to gain part 2 for free as well. Now, as I've mentioned earlier, we do have some really exciting news that we want to share with you as we are coming to at the very end of our workshop series on differentiation and inclusion. So thank you so much for waiting until the very end as well. And so we have a new workshop series that we are thrilled and excited to share with you, again, which are about 15 minutes long, and it's a 4-part workshop series focusing on professionalism. And they will be on the last Tuesday of each month at 3 p.m. And there will be a certification as well as badges for completing the series as well. There'll be more information coming out, so please do watch and focus on our social media as well, and we'll be sharing more information too. But we are coming towards the end of our live workshop. We want to say thank you so much for joining all of our workshop lives, if you have, across the series. Again, we are so thrilled and delighted to have Emmanuel as our ambassador, but also to share all the preparation that you've done for this workshop. So thank you so much for today as well.
It's my pleasure, Priya. Thank you.
You're most welcome. Thank you so much for everyone for joining, and we appreciate you, and we will see you next time as well. Thank you again. Bye now.